Every single year, Apple sells the iPad like it can finally replace your laptop, and every year it gets a little bit closer, but never quite there. Yet again, they've put a more powerful processor in the hardware. Big whoop. The more important thing, in my opinion, is with iPadOS 26, there's a very desktop-like free window mode. Is that enough? I have been using this iPad Pro 13-inch for the last 10 days to really sink my teeth into it. I'm not really a tech reviewer, I'm a real-life creative who has a 2019-inch aging MacBook Pro that needs to be replaced soon. And I, for the past year, have been using a Mac Mini that's done most of the heavy lifting for my photo and video editing needs. And so for my laptop, I was thinking about stepping down to a MacBook Air. But then it occurred to me I could use an iPad. Is a different form factor the better choice? Most of my mobile needs are pretty basic, stuff like sending emails, writing scripts, and brainstorming, but it's not uncommon in a pinch I might need to do something creative like produce a photo or a video. So it is important that I take stock of the creative chops this thing has. So I'm gonna break this into two camps. On one hand, the basic stuff that everyone is going to do no matter what if they use this iPad, and on the second, I'm gonna document my experience on creative endeavors. First, I really just want to address basic use, stuff that everyone will experience using this iPad, and I'm really pleased to say that I was actually very happy with most of my experience with it, but there are a few drags that may hold you back from choosing this over a MacBook or a PC. The very first thing we should take a look at is its form factor. At the end of the day, it is a tablet with magnetic accessories that can switch into a computer mode, and I do find it very easy to switch from computer to tablet mode. This thing feels incredible in the hand. Using it on the couch genuinely might be one of my favorite computing experiences ever. The accessories are a must, especially if you want to get work done and actually replace your laptop. I actually think that's the hardest pill to swallow, is that the accessories are so expensive and add up so fast. One of my biggest nitpicks is that this iPad can support up to 60-watt charging, but in the box there's only a 20-watt charger included. Considering the iPad has almost half the battery life of a MacBook, I think it would have been nice if they included something to top it off faster. And I think it's a bit of a bummer because MacBooks that cost less have a faster charger and a longer cable included. I have accepted that they will probably never bring the headphone jack back to the iPad, but I do think if they want to have this be a real laptop replacement, it would benefit considerably to have a second USB-C Thunderbolt port. Old news, but I do really like that the webcam has been moved from portrait to landscape mode for better webcam use when it's in that computer mode, and I really just like it because it's a sign of Apple dropping years of stubbornness. I think it takes real courage to admit that you've been wrong for years, similar to them going to a thicker chassis for the M series MacBooks. One of the biggest changes you'll immediately face if you switch from a MacBook to an iPad is the new file management system, which is all done through the Files app, and I am very pleased to say it's a very competent app. Do I prefer Mac? Yes. But I do think this is very serviceable. I actually like the Magic Keyboard a lot more than I thought I would, but I do have two big nitpicks, especially considering the price. It is a little bit clumsier than I'd like, in two big ways. First is it makes it really top heavy, which isn't the end of the world, you can definitely get used to it, but when you're walking around with it in your hands, it feels a little bit precarious. And second, when it's closed, I wish there was an easier leverage point to open it up, similar to a MacBook. That's a really nice experience. Here, it feels like you're almost prying something open. If I actually were to say my biggest nitpick for the price, I really wish that the pass-through charging port was on both sides, so if the outlet's either side of you, it's way easier to charge. To add one final thing to the Magic Keyboard, because it's really been a high note for me, is I do think that the trackpad is phenomenal. I found myself using it more than even clicking the screen, and I do like that they've been willing to go all the way to an actual pointer. In my opinion, the trackpad is the best part of the keyboard. The Apple Pencil Pro is nice, but I don't think it's that big of an upgrade over the previous generation Pencil. The writing still feels very nice. I personally don't find myself needing something like a paper-like screen protector. I like the writing experience. I think I'm being a bit harsh on it because really my biggest nitpick is I was really optimistic for that squeeze feature. I really thought that that could be like the right click of the tablet world, but in practicality, it kind of has been nothing in the fact that there's nothing to indicate when you're using it, so you kind of just have to squeeze randomly and see what pops up. And on top of that, I really wish it worked in conjunction with that hover feature. It would be cool if you could hover over an icon, squeeze it, and items would come up like when you long press with your finger. The pencil is still a good pencil, but I really think that that hover and squeeze gesture could go a lot further and they could really flesh it out. What actually really makes the iPad viable for me for the very first time is that new desktop-like free window mode. Is it as good as the Mac? No, but it's just good enough to make this really viable for me to do all the multitasking I need. I can write a script, do my research, and listen to music all at the same time, and it's a very wonderful experience. To talk a little bit more about browsing, the iPad has always claimed desktop class browsing, which it has gotten a lot better than it was years ago, and since they've started saying that, it's even gotten better since. I do find it to be very usable and very good and work exactly how you'd expect it to for most major big websites. If you do go to some smaller, less optimized, more jank websites, I do find it to still act like a tablet and not necessarily act the way you'd expect it to. Your mileage may vary, but I do find it to be mostly solid. What has really pleasantly surprised me is how much I enjoy reading on this thing. I know that I'm probably one of 12 people who really enjoys using the News Plus app, but just reading a news article or a magazine on here has been way more enjoyable than reading it on my phone. Enough so that I could see myself buying more ebooks if I got an iPad. And that's from someone who's been a staunch physical book person for years. But to speak more about the screen in a more general way, for watching movies, it's phenomenal. For editing stuff, it's phenomenal. I really like with the Pro models, they've actually added the ability to calibrate it like you would with like a desktop class monitor. It's just really good for when work is actually serious. Probably a little bit above my pay grade, but I just like that it's there. But for general using like websites, movies, it's phenomenal. The only thing I will add is because it's a tablet and because it's touchscreen, I do find myself needing to clean it significantly more than I ever did with my MacBook. The only thing that disappointed me just a little bit was I think the speakers lean a tad tinny. They're totally usable, and I'd even say they're good. I think you're really just pushing the physics of what you can fit in a device that's not even 6mm thick. And I do have to give them the fact that the stereo effect and the separation of instruments is pretty good. But if I ever made the change from a MacBook Pro, I think a full, rich sound would be one of the things I miss the most. I did take the time to play a few games on here, and it was really fun playing XCOM and Call It Working, but I did have to delete it because it was taking too much of my time away. But I will say, the game choices on the iPad are actually way better than I thought they'd be. There's a lot of old like PlayStation 2 era games like Max Payne and stuff, and it's really easy to hook up a controller. Is this as good as a Switch 2? Probably not, but if this is the one device you're traveling with, I think there are a lot of games to be found and a lot of fun to be had. One of the final basic apps I really just want to touch on is the Freeform app, which I have wanted to love this app for years on Mac, and it just hasn't really clicked for me. Using it on the iPad, I can tell this is 100% what this app was made for, and it just shines. Doing brainstorming sessions, planning stuff, like putting prints on my shop, it's just a very lovely experience, and genuinely, this app alone might be enough to make me switch to an iPad over a MacBook. To make some final comments on the operating system, as someone who just used macOS Tahoe, and then to take a look at this, iPadOS 26, it is so clearly evident to me that the iPad is the favorite child at Apple, and they love it, and honestly, I've really enjoyed it. Them finally going full force and adding things like a menu bar and stoplights and a free window mode is phenomenal, and it really makes the user experience truly wonderful. This is how it always should have been. For creative use, especially at a professional level, I have a lot to say, and this is what I'll say. Photography and videography are probably the only places I can even remotely talk. I do like to have fun with all disciplines of art, but those are really the only places I would say I have any professional prowess. My drawing, my music. Amateur at best. Let's start with what I can probably speak best on, photography, and I would say every like 2 to 3 years since it's come out, I've checked on the Adobe iPad Professional Suite, and I think that's reasonable because it's the professional standard. If you walk into any editing house, like maybe they'll use Capture One, but for photography, Adobe really is the industry standard, and I gotta tell you, I'm still really disappointed. Some stuff is okay. Lightroom, I would actually say, is pretty usable for most people, especially casual and to enthusiast use. Like, you really can push a photo to be better than it was when you took it, and I think it'll look great for posting on Instagram. But if you're actually a professional, getting paid, delivering to clients, I think that the workflow here is still terrible. And it really comes down to two things. I really wish that they had Lightroom Classic. It's just a better piece of software for professional solutions. CC is great, but it's clearly targeted at more casual users. And really the biggest f***ing embarrassment is Photoshop. Photoshop is literally such a pale imitation of what it is on desktop, it's funny. It is lacking such basic features, it literally boggles my mind. For testing purposes, I was like, hey, let's just make a thumbnail. You can't even create basic shapes. Like, what the hell? I'm pretty sure it's been like 7 years. What are you guys doing? And look, you might say, John, you just did a video talking about how much you love the Apple Photos app on Mac. And I do. And you'd say, John, but the Adobe apps are better than that. Yeah, but the Photos app is free. These are $5 to $70 a month, depending on what plan you pick. That's insane. I will say, I really hope Apple with their Pixelmator acquisition really try to bring back Aperture, but at the very least, I really hope that they can bring the Apple Photos app on iPad in parity with what's on the Mac, because it's actually pretty competent. Look, am I being a bit harsh on Adobe? Yeah, but of all the companies, I think they deserve it the most. They have been on the iPad for a long time, and they're not treating it like a real professional platform. At best, what I would say is they're treating it as a companion device to you actually having a real desktop, because there are some features where you can start an iPad Photoshop file on your iPad, and you go on the computer, and it'll be there. Like, that's kind of cool, but like, why can't it just work? Affinity has complete one-to-one parity with what's on the Mac and with what's on the iPad. I don't understand why it's so difficult. Do I need some of the deeper tools? No. but you're lacking basic stuff like shapes, and you don't even have an invert tool, for which I will admit, flipping negative film is probably a little niche at this point, but like, why? Why? I've had a lot of fun with the iPad. I actually really want to get it, but I'm just really disappointed with where Adobe is and how they're treating the iPad. I really wish that they took it more seriously, and I'm sure that there's other options that aren't Adobe. I think I only get so mad because I've actually genuinely enjoyed the iPad hardware and even operating system experience so much that I wish that the professional apps could follow suit and be as competent as they are on the Mac. My personal recommendation for photos specifically, because this is where I think I have the most weight to talk, if you're actually a professional who wants to push your photos as far as you humanly can, or if you're working under any kind of like actual commission structure for like weddings or professional brands, you're just gonna be way better suited on a Mac or a PC. The iPad just isn't there for high-end professionals yet. Lightroom CC is actually a decent experience. I will say I think that covers the needs of a lot of people. I just wish it was cheaper, and I wish your Photoshop didn't suck. But I will say, if you really want an iPad and you are more casual, editing photos in Lightroom CC on the couch, it's a pretty chill time. But guys, fix Photoshop. The drawing experience is phenomenal, even if my drawings aren't. I think there's not a lot to say here. If you're a graphic designer or a digital artist, you probably already own an iPad, or you want one, or you're a Wacom loyalist, which is great. They make good stuff too. But I just think the iPad's clearly class leading here. This is probably the biggest reason that most people own an iPad for a professional workflow. Video editing is probably the one area I wish I got a little more time with, and what I will say is I personally find video editing to be pretty tedious. And I think on the iPad, I find it just a bit more tedious, so I would probably not prefer to go this route, but maybe if I spent more time with it, I'd get more comfortable and get just as fast or just as slow as I am on the Mac. What I will say is the apps did seem pretty competent. If this was your only device, I think there's actually a lot of options for making like solid YouTube videos. I really think you can do it, but I personally still prefer just editing on a Mac. Audio is probably the area I can speak the absolute least, and this is what I'll say. I did have a lot of fun playing around in GarageBand, and I did find it useful to use the iPad as a mobile recorder for my mic, just getting my audio. And I didn't even bother with the high-end apps because I wouldn't know what I'm doing, but there is Logic in here that I do know a lot of people like. I probably have the least amount of merit to speak here, but considering Steve Lacy did some of his first music on iPhone in GarageBand, if you really care and this is your only device, you probably really can make music. This is kind of the conclusion I'm reaching with the creative apps, and I think Apple does it, and I think that the third-party professional apps do it as well. They're really wishy-washy on whether they want the iPad to be a full laptop standalone computer experience or if it's a companion to having a MacBook or a full-on desktop. Because look, some apps are really solid and they're great experiences, and if you actually fall into that niche, there really is a good workflow for you, and the iPad experience I think is pretty good. But there's also a lot of random stuff too where you just can't do it on the iPad because the app just doesn't have it. And look, in Apple's perfect world, you'd own one of every single one of their devices, but money's not infinite and most people will never do that. Like I said in the beginning, most of my work is done on my Mac Mini. So I'm in a rare camp because 90% of all Mac users are on MacBooks. Only 10% are desktop. So when I look at my mobile solution, I can actually go a different route. I think if you have a MacBook, the iPad is a little redundant. Is this perfect? No, but this is what I'll say. If you're kind of entry level to even pretty solid enthusiast, I think that there's a lot of apps here where you really could use the iPad as your only device. But if you're professional in literally anything, I think you're so much better off getting a Mac or a PC. To be completely honest with you, when my MacBook kicks the bucket, I really think I'm going to get an iPad, but that's because I'm in an extremely rare camp. 90% of all Mac users have a MacBook. And if you have a MacBook, I think that the iPad is redundant in a lot of ways, especially if you don't draw. But with the desktop, I think it makes a ton of sense because I get a different operating system, I get different pros, and yes, different cons, but that's with everything. Whereas if I get a MacBook Air, I just have a portable version of my Mac. If I was Apple, I actually think that they should push more desktop sales so more people get iPads to be their portable solution. For a lot of use cases, I think it's better than a MacBook. And it's gotten pretty competent for doing a lot of creative and higher end stuff. And if you have a desktop to go to when the going gets a little tough, the shortcomings of the iPad just aren't as bad. It kind of gets to be both. It gets to be a companion tool and a standalone tool. And I think for more people to get to benefit from that, Apple should really get more desktop sales. And I really think the best way that Apple could do that, Apple's kind of put themselves in a corner in my opinion. macOS really benefits from very specific resolutions because of their image scaling pipeline. It's 2 times instead of 1-to-1 like PC. What this means is that most monitors on the market 4K don't technically play as nice as they should with macOS. which means if you want the best experience you can, you have to get a 5K display, which are just, on average, significantly more expensive. Apple should either make an iMac with a Pro chip in it, or they should make a standalone 5K monitor that's color accurate for like under $800. Then the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio could even be a way better value. And then in turn, if more people have Mac Minis and Mac Studios, I think the iPad makes more sense for their mobile solution. Like I said, my circumstances aren't everyone's. Some people, the iPad already is the best solution. There are people I've talked to where they're like, I need the cameras, I need the cellular service. There are already roles where the iPad makes more sense than a MacBook. And I'm great if that's the solution for you. Is it at the place where the iPad makes more sense for most people? I don't think so. In the fact that, like I said, most people own an iPhone and a MacBook. And I don't think we're in a world yet where it makes the most sense to own an iPhone and an iPad. If you can really only own one computing device, I really think it should be something that runs macOS. But the iPad is the best experience it's ever been. And someone who does own a desktop, I'm gonna tell you right now, when my 16-inch MacBook Pro goes out, I am getting an iPad Pro 13-inch. That's 100% from the bottom of my heart, that is what I will be spending my own hard-earned money on. It really shouldn't be your only computer. It has gotten better over time, and I hope it continues to do so. There are still a lot of niche cases that you will eventually hit where macOS is just a better solution than the iPad. The iPad is just limited on weird things. Perfect example, if I want to scan my film prints, this just can't talk to my scanner. I just can't do it. I need a Mac. Everyone's situation is a little bit different, and yours isn't mine, but I hope I've told you enough regarding your situation that you can make the best informed decision you can. Subscribe for more tech and creative endeavors. Cheers. Thank you so much for watching.